Hello there, lovely people, it's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're reviewing Shantae Risky's Revenge, Director's Cut on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the wonderful Mitch Vogel, and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling, let's dive right into things. Though Shantae has become a mainstay in recent years, it wasn't too long ago that this franchise was scarcely more than a niche curiosity. The original Shantae game was essentially an indie game before indie games, and its release at the very end of the Game Boy Color's lifespan didn't do it any favors garnering a fan base, even if it did get a lot of colors out of that system. It would be nearly a decade before Shantae would be given another lease of life on the DSiWare service in Shantae Risky's Revenge, which has now been ported forward to the Switch as a director's cut, and that's what we're talking about right bloomin' now. 10 years on, Risky's Revenge is certainly beginning to show its age, especially compared to later entries which are also available on the Switch, but it's still a remarkably well-built experience that captures the series' unique identity well. The story picks up with the annual Relic Hunter Expo, in which Shantae's uncle Mimic inadvertently unearths an old magical lamp on stage before the attendees. Shortly thereafter, Risky Boots arrives on the scene aboard her living pirate ship and spirits the lamp away, while dropping some cryptic hints of her nefarious plans for it because she's a villain. Thus kicks off the tense race against time in which Shantae must find and obtain the 3 magic seals hidden across Sequin Land which can unlock the lamp's power, and she must do this before Risky can get them and enact her eponymous revenge. As has become the norm for the series, the plot is hardly the focus, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's to be ignored either. Though the larger beats of the story are about as rote as they can possibly get, it's the personalities of the characters and amusing interactions they have with each other that instills this world with so much charisma. For example, your quote-unquote key to enter the first dungeon is not actually a key, but a tasty meal prepared for the dungeon's final boss, who lets you in because he's hungry. After he scarfs it down, he decides to stiff Shantae on the quote-unquote bill, which is the first of the seals she's looking for, before running away to his chamber. It's frequent moments like this which remind you that the plot seldom takes itself too seriously, but this sort of goofy levity is what gives the world and its characters that alluring edge. Risky's Revenge plays out like a fairly typical Metroidvania, with you having a big gated 2D map to explore, which is dotted with upgrades, collectibles, and a handful of dungeons to navigate. Completing dungeons with other objectives will see Shantae receiving boosts to her health and attacks, along with a handful of animal transformations which grant her access to new areas. The monkey form, for example, gives her a stronger jump and lets her climb walls, whilst the mermaid allows for greater underwater movement, if that's even remotely surprising. Upgrades are doled out reasonably quickly, with you having the option to buy basically all but the animal transformations at a shop in town. Given the relative ease of dealing with enemies, however, the additional boons offered up by the shop can often feel a little bit like overkill, stripping a great deal of difficulty from combat which isn't all that challenging to begin with. Still, it's tough to be disappointed with the variety of playstyles present in Risky's Revenge, and WayForward did a good job expanding upon the gameplay it established in the first Shantae. Compared to that debut release, the level design has also received quite an upgrade, although this proves to be a bit of a double-edged sword in some instances. The world is more intricate than before and features plenty of curiosities that will reward completionists, but its additional size is handicapped a bit by a weird map that doesn't really do much to help you when it comes to remembering point of interests for later. Worse yet, there isn't a map at all when you go into any of the dungeons, which can lead to some moments of frustration if, say, you're missing a key to a door and have no means of knowing where it could be or where you haven't checked yet. It's never like mega difficult to find the right way again, but issues like this tend to take the enjoyment out of exploration. For the most part, Risky's Revenge is the game you remember from the DSi all those years ago, but the director's cut brings with it some welcome improvements to give this version just that little bit of extra value. For one thing, the fast travel system has received a much needed fix, which makes it far easier to zip from one end of Sequin Land to the next with minimum hassle. There's also a new magic mode, which is a sort of a new game plus, wherein Shantae has enhanced magic magical abilities, but takes more damage. Neither of these new additions are exactly game changers, but they do add some meaningful content to help round out some of the, shall we say, rougher edges of the original experience. In terms of presentation, Risky's Revenge is exactly the game you remember it being on DSi, which can be both a good thing and a bad thing. Good in that the sprite work and environmental design is legitimately excellent and rife with detail. Bad in that it doesn't scale that well up on modern displays. The default display with borders is fine, but it blows the image up so you can see every pixel in all its low-res glory. Stretching the image or displaying the original resolution are both additional options, but neither realistically proves to be worthwhile for extended play. The display issue couldn't exactly easily be sidestepped without, like, totally remaking things from the ground up, so it's tough to fault the developers for going down the route that they have, but just be aware that Risky's Revenge is rather obviously a game made for a handheld in 2010. As you may well have gleaned from the review thus far, perhaps the greatest issue that Risky's Revenge faces is that it hasn't aged gracefully compared to its peers. It's not that the core experience here has changed at all or grown worse, but the latter entries in the series, which once again are also available on Switch, further refined and improved upon most of the ideas that appeared here, and in turn have set the bar much higher. Going back to this earlier release is still enjoyable then, but the simpler and more rough-cut nature of the overall experience makes it more difficult to recommend over its brethren. The cheaper price certainly helps to offset this perceived imbalance in quality, but just be aware before taking the plunge that there are better Shantae games which you can also buy for the same system. Shantae Risky's Revenge Director's Cut still holds up reasonably well, offering a mid-length Metroidvania experience with plenty of charming dialogue, secrets to uncover, and enemies to furiously whip with long purple hair if you're lucky enough to have it. That being said, it's also beginning to show its age with a weird map system and a more simplistic gameplay style, keeping it somewhat held back in the past. It's still an easy recommendation if you're a fan of Shantae or are looking for a cheap entry into the franchise, but we'd also recommend that you first look into the other entries as well, and just kind of weigh up your options as to which Shantae game on Switch is the right one for you. You've reached the end of the review, and you know what that means. Yes, it's time for Alex's personal thoughts, and this is a bit of a different one for me. I was actually slightly disappointed by this game. From an objective point of view, it's still a perfectly fine game. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but I don't know. I just felt I got a little bit disappointed by it. My memories of it, I think, of maybe slightly rose-tinted, and I remembered it as being better than it was. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but well, I just found little things, you know, that really irked me, like, as Mitch said, the lack of a map and things like that. And one thing that I had forgotten right at the start of the game, you have to try and find Rotty Tops, which, you know, fair enough, and you get told that it's just a straight shot, you know, go through the field and go through the woods. But the thing is that the game doesn't really spell out where there is an edge which you can transition to a new screen, which sometimes is used for secrets, which is absolutely fine, but oftentimes you're just stuck running against screens until you find the one that you need to use, and I just felt it wasn't as well explained as I remembered it, and I don't know whether it's just a weird blank in my head, but I had totally forgotten where to go. It was weirdly embarrassing. It's still good fun, but I do think that it is really starting to show its wrinkles, and we've been a little bit spoiled with other Shantae games by now, I think, and yeah, I would say, unless, you know, sort of money really is very tight for you, then, and you're desperate to play a Shantae game, one of the other games may be more up your street, maybe Half Genie Hero or something like that. I was just a bit sort of, I was just a little bit disappointed. Still a good game, just not as good as I remember.